Well, hello and welcome back to this discussion talking about the Spider-Man Life Story miniseries, written by Chip Zdarsky and is art with Mark Bagsley. This is issue 2, entitled Our Father's Way, or Fathers and Sons. Confusingly, the next issue part of the last issue entitles it Father's Son, but this issue is called Our Father's Way. I don't know if there was a technical issue there or there's something hidden or something, I don't know, but I just found it a really strange decision there. But anyway, this story is now set in the 70s. It's still early on in Peter Parker's life, so it's still, at the moment, not taking full advantage of its concept of showing the Marvel Universe, specifically Spider-Man's world, without the infamous Marvel time, which allows characters to not age after decades of stories and continuity. So we're still not, it's not taking full advantage of it, but here we do get specific elements of Peter getting slightly older and stuff. This story also tackles two specific storylines infamous to Spider-Man fans. Not the best storylines. In fact, one of them is definitely not one of the best of the storylines that Spider-Man has to offer, but two of the most well-known storylines. Two that most people, if you ask most people what Spider-Man stories they would recommend, or at least that they can name, I believe these two would be the stories that people would recommend. One of them I will not name until the end, but the other one is the Clone Saga. For those of you who don't know, the Clone Saga was this massive event. I believe it was the late 80s and the early 90s. I could be mistaken. And it went on for years and years and years due to editorial mandates and stuff. And it all to do with Spider-Man and a specific character called Professor Warren, who is in this story. That gets more dealt with at the end of the issue. So we'll talk a bit more about that there. But two of my complaints with the last issue, if you haven't seen that video of mine, is that the story was heavily connected with the Spider-Man lore, meaning that this, right off the bat, it is not a accessible story for newcomers. And the fact that it tried to tell a story, not like a big story, but a big enough story that one issue I didn't feel like handled it very well. I felt like the story needed a bit more time to expand on anything. But I feel like those two criticisms are actually dealt with pretty well here. I feel like the story is compacted in a way where one issue does it justice. And I also feel like, despite it does heavily rely on the Spider-Man mythos, it's not done in a way that it will alienate new readers to this run, unlike the last issue, which is probably the more important, but it's nice anyway. So anyway, the story actually starts off with Peter at a graveyard, where we get introduced to him talking about like how much he's life has changed around and everything's getting a little bit easier for Harry, and like Professor Warren is getting better, and he's now become a bioengineer for a company. And he also talks about Gwen, his wife. Yes, this is the story in which that is now established in this continuity. And without Peter knowing it, Gwen is actually there. Now, I like Gwen here Though I do feel like some of the dialogue is a bit, I don't want to say cheesy, but it does feel like Gwen's only purpose is to comfort Peter. But for her role in that, I think here she does a very good job. And Chip Daskarsky is writing here is pretty good on the note. I like she can understand that Peter is taking all this guilt, as Peter feels like he could have done something and not let this person who he's meeting the gravestone of die, if it wasn't for the fact that, if he got involved more, if he wasn't hoarding the power, if he had more responsibility for his powers, he felt like they should be at least more publicized in a sense. And then in the next panel, it's actually revealed that the gravestone is to Eugene Flash Thompson. The character in the last issue was the one who was celebrating for him going into the Vietnam War. It's here that's established that he died during the war, and that's left Peter in a very rough patch in a mindset. But however, still our things are good for him. He's got a nice loving wife. He's actually working with Reed Richards of Fantastic Four fame, as he's now a high-class scientist, basically a psychic in terms of the science profession to Reed Richards. But as Peter describes, they don't do a lot of work. They mainly get caught up in conversations of like philosophy and how Reed Richards has all these amazing technologies. Like there's a great bit where Peter talks about the Fantastic Four costumes and how they're amazingly put together, but why don't we use them? Why don't we send them out to the public? A lot of people would have benefited with this technology. That scene actually comes out a little bit later on in the issue. However, it's also here that we also get established Dr. Octo Octavius, which is actually after his life of crime. It's here that get a lot of establishing of events from the past. It's here that we learn that Octavius was originally a bad guy, but he had changed his way after a heart attack. He's also now married to Aunt May, making him the uncle of Peter Parker, which he finds really odd. And that's a nice little humorous moment. But Peter then comes a bit to think, as he's thinking about all these inventions and how Nixon has recently resigned. Again, tying into the more real world aspects, like in the previous issue. Along with the concept of a non-Marvel time universe, Life Story also deals with real world events and its ramifications on the people, as Peter is thinking about all this stuff. But in 1977, I believe this issue was set, the Vietnam War is still going on. People are dying seemingly for no reason, and Iron Man is still there. It's also been reported on the news that Captain America's gone rogue, which I find really strange, because I'm pretty sure the last issue where Captain America goes rogue was very recent to the 1960s, so he's been there for at least a decade. But anyway, Harry goes to meet his father, who's in prison, who seemingly has regained his memories and is basically trying to get Harry to do something for him, something to do with a particular project which Norman wants to get all the assets back before the company deteriorates, something to do with a secret. And if Harry gets involved, there's one more secret he's got to tell him, which obviously, as a viewing figure, we know what the secret is. So this is the moment in which Norman Osborn tells Harry that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, although we never actually see that play out. We just presume, in a sense. We get some nice scenes then of Peter Parker going to Gwen Stacy's laboratory, where him and her meet Professor Warren, their old school teacher, who seems really nice and polite. He even offers Peter a job if he doesn't like it with Reed Richards, which is very nice. But I also like right at the end of the scene, there's a zoom up on Professor Warren's face, kind of indicating that there's something sinister going along with him. Again, it's one of those things where it's a reference to the Clone Saga, that, Professor Warren isn't exactly the most moral character, but it plays well into the story. It doesn't feel like the writer is going, "Ooh, look, this is a reference to something it feels more natural to the plot. And Peter is asked to go to a disco, something to do with Harry Osborn. So Peter goes and swings by in this new costume, a little bit more armored costume. It's a very similar costume to his previous costume. I really like it. I especially like the logo, how it bleeds out and stuff. I don't know if this is a reference to any costume in the 616. I like the eyes a bit more bulging out. I really like I also just noticed whilst looking at the panel now that he has a bag that's made out of webs, which I find really funny. I think the armor should have been coloured red, but that's more of a small creative decision in a sense. I like it. I personally like it. I don't know if it's a reference to something that happened in the 70s, but speaking of the 70s, this story, compared to its previous art style in the last issue, has a lot more of a darker colour palette. I don't know, again, if that is how comic books looked in the 70s. From what I can gather, they looked more like they did in the 60s with lots of bright colours. But I know the 70s tackled with a lot more darker issues. So I believe that could be a representation of that. And now here we get into probably one of my most controversial opinions about this story, as Peter Parker goes to this disco to meet Harry. He's not really comfortable being here, but he meets Harry's wife, Mary Jane Watson. Now, a lot of people are going to probably will be like, because this is a very controversial opinion. I've never been a fan of Mary Jane Watson. From the majority of stories that I've seen of her, which I will say, though, isn't a lot. So I might be just the specific stories that I've seen of her. She always comes off as just like a character specifically for a purpose, to put Peter out of his moods and be like the perfect girlfriend in a way. And she feels a lot less like a character in things, rather than just someone to help Peter along the lines. But here, obviously, she's not with Peter, she's with Harry. So hopefully we will get some great dialogue and some nice moments with her and show that she can be a great independent character, right? Well, Peter basically proclaims, it's like, he looks around and he's like, I don't know about this. Harry's a bit he's a bit stoned at the moment. He's on drugs and he's zoning out at the moment. Presumably he's sleeping because he doesn't seem to move. But he's passed out anyway. And Mary Jane just kicks off at Peter and says stuff about like his laboratory work, and really like upsets Peter. Now, the bit she complains about like Peter like not doing anything in his work, and this is like a theme of Peter Parker, like he could do so much more, and it's something which I feel like Peter, especially that he is Spider-Man, would feel like, he puts in his mind. It's like he does stuff, but he can do so much more. But a majority of cases, when he's saying he's doing so much more in most continuities, he's doing it as the reporter. He's doing it as like a part-time photographer for the Daily Bugle. But here, Mary Jane's complaining he's not doing enough as a scientist for Reed Richards. Like, Mary, you know that scientists isn't an easy job. It comes off as one of those kind of things where there's two reasons for this. I think it makes Mary Jane come off really like one of those really popular girls who like doesn't realize that like if you're not running around doing sports or doing something really fit, then you're just sitting about doing lazy work, which makes Mary Jane here very unlikable in my opinion. But the reason why this is done, why this is in the story, is because to make Peter feel more guilt that he's not doing enough. And I can believe Peter not believing he's doing enough. Like, you know, especially this story is going around saying, like, he's putting in his mind, it's like there's a war going on. It's also revealed here that Mary Jane has actually known about Peter's identity, which is such an odd twist. Like, it's never like, there's not like a scene where she stumbles upon it. She just states that she knows, and she's known since she was 15. Like, it's just such a, that scene in the disco is just so poorly written and poorly executed in my opinion. It's just so, it just clearly plays as Chip Starkey going, right, we need Peter to feel even more guilty than he originally deserved. Something which will push him to debate against Reed Richards in the next scene. So let's have just Mary Jane just push him for not doing good as a bloody scientist, being lazy for being a scientist, and not saving Flash when he was Spider-Man. And it just didn't work in my opinion. Mark Bagsley does fantastic art here, especially like the last panel in the disco scene in which we get into some nice zoom ups on Peter's face, and like always, Mark Bagley really knows how to angle his shots. That's like, I think, is one of his strengths as an artist, is his angles. But anyway, we then get a scene of Peter with Reed Richards and really confronts him about how basically they hoard the technology that they have. And Reed Richards basically proclaims is like, right, there's an industry here where a lot of people have jobs and are reliant on their business and going. If we release this to the public, then we're taking a bunch of people out of business, and that wouldn't be the responsible thing to do. And Peter then goes basically mad because, you know, he hasn't had enough sleep. This is a concern which has bothered him for a while now, and even like is like saying to Reed Richards that like, why can't you just talk to us like people? Why are you acting like you're not even human? And Reed Richards is like, we're not humans though, we're superheroes, aren't we? We're more than human, we're greater than humans. With all the stuff with mutants going on, then we're not really humans. And when Peter gets so mad at this, he even like makes a comment about how his wife left him for the man under the sea, to which Reed Richards just slaps Peter Parker across the face. Probably one of my favorite scenes in this issue. Both as in, like, at that point, with Peter's comment, Peter bloody deserves that slap. And there's a great little text in it in which he states that his spider sense warned him, but he let the slap land. But it also helps, like, because Peter Parker, in his mindset, you can see his understanding where he's coming from. And despite the fact that we haven't even had, like, a proper villain yet, we haven't even been really, like, examined into the villain yet. We're still getting this hard-hitting drama that's really working. We get a pretty average scene of Harry and Mary Jane talking, and Harry's getting ready for an event. He talks to his father on the phone, and then Peter goes into Professor Warren's laboratory. He's heading there until Warren and Gwen actually get attacked by a new goblin in this black and gold outfit, which looks all right. I wish there was a little bit more gold to it. Like, the fact there's only like a little bit of gold makes it feel a bit odd. They either should have gone white to make it much more of a contrast, or put more gold into it. Maybe some gold boots or something. I don't know, something a bit more standout. I also love the bag. I find that pretty funny. And basically, we as an audience know that this is Harry Osborn because, you know, he's the only villain that's been built up at this point. And he basically is like, Warren, I'm come here to get back what we were promised, something that you promised us, which you haven't like fulfilled on your side of the bargain. So he starts strangling Warren until Spider-Man kicks in, and we get a really short fight scene. An issue I have with this story and the last issue, which can come into easy the complaint of these issues just being an issue long to tell each story, is that the fight scenes are incredibly short. This one lasts literally one page before Harry sets a bomb off onto a wall, revealing the secret. Something which shocks him so much he has to take his mask off. I especially love the scene in which Peter Parker, still in the Spider-Man costume, is like, what the hell's going on? And he just turns around and he's like, Harry? I especially love that. But anyway, here is where we get into the connections of the Clone Saga. As it turns out, Professor Warren has been making clones. It turns out that he was promised by Norman Osborn to make clones of Norman himself and Peter Parker, because Peter was one of his obsessions. He originally thought that Harry was a bummed up, like a waste of space, and that Peter was actually a true heir to the throne in a sense, which again is something that relies on Spider-Man fans knowing this prior to going into the issue. But I feel like you do still get the sense of that, especially in the last issue. So I wouldn't consider that much of a complaint. But there's also a clone of Gwen Stacy, which horrifies everybody and everyone finds it a little bit sick. It's like, why Gwen? Gwen has nothing to do with anybody's plan. And Peter and Harry then have a shouting match on top of the rooftop as Peter injures Harry to the point where he can't get up. And Harry is like, it's like really quickly, I think again, it's another like a pacing issue by the fact that it is only one issue long to tell a story. As long as Peter's like, stop this, your father is insane, he's controlling you, don't let him come between us. And Harry's like, yeah, you're right. And then he looks at this hole, an opportunity he can see to blow up the building and destroy the clones, and it comes down, and Warren is screaming, no. It turns out Gwen and Warren survived. They escaped before Harry set the bomb off. And originally, Peter Parker's like, okay, these clones, these abominations, they're destroyed and all is well and good and all of the madness is gone. But Gwen demands Peter to go in and save them. And despite there being clones, in her mind, they're still living beings. So even though they're clones, even though technically they're an abomination of science, she still wants Peter to save the clones. This small little scene, it's literally a small panel in the page that it's on, makes me love Gwen Stacy as a character. That just shows why Gwen Stacy, in my opinion, in my mind, is such a better lead than Mary Jane Watson, especially in this life story event. So Peter goes back into the burning furnace, trying to save the clones. It turns out that the Gwen clone and the Norman Osborn clone has quickly died, but the Peter clone with the spider senses has actually survived because he's got much more durability and much more strength than your average human, and so he survived. And so Peter comes back to the rooftop where Gwen and Warren are, and Warren is freaking out. He's gone absolutely insane, to which he reveals that he had a plan. He used these clones not only as a project for Norman Osborn, but for his sick obsession with Gwen Stacy. In fact, this was his plan, is that he cloned Gwen and he replaced the real Gwen with the fake Gwen, and that it was actually the real Gwen that was in the furnace, which Peter Parker then runs up into the furnace and holds her dead body as we get a nice completely blank panel. Now this is a reference to the second storyline that this story takes influence from, and that is, of course, the death of Gwen Stacy, in which Peter Parker's love interest Gwen Stacy gets killed by, in that story, the Green Goblin. And here it's done okay. I mean, this feels a little bit more like a reference, but it's still part of the plot. It's still part of the emotional gathering. And the story essentially ends with, it cuts to a year later where the clones of Gwen and Peter are basically like, right, we're going to move on. We're going to live our lives and let the real Peter get on with his daily life. As Mary Jane tries to confront Peter in his really dark mindset, as Peter is like, well, you got away from Harry and you even got his money, you've got everything, you don't have to even sleep with him anymore. But what do I have, Mary? What do I have left in my life? My wife turned out to either be dead or a clone who's now gone with with Ben Parker, the clone of Peter Parker. Like, what does Peter have left? And Mary then tries to comfort him by saying, like, hey, Tiger, that's not true at all, and gives him a hug, which, like, again, like, this is supposed to be the same woman who thought he was a lazy bugger for being a scientist. Like, I know, I'm complaining about Gwen Stacy. I mean, it's a nice scene if you like Mary Jane, but as someone who doesn't like Mary Jane, it just didn't fit well for me. So that's issue 2. I think overall this is a lot better than the previous issue. I think the story it tells here, despite being influenced from a storyline that spanned years of continuity, does a nice job of fitting in its narrative structures and its pacing in one issue. And it feels a lot more compact. It feels a lot more like a story here. We get a lot of great emotional baggage with Peter, and he still feels like he's not doing enough, and that seems to be a running theme in this story. And my only real issue with it is that scene in the disco with Mary Jane. That's literally my only complaint, and it's kind of a big complaint because that scene just sucks. I just absolutely hate that scene. But the rest of the story is really good. I really liked Harry's little confrontation here. Again, for one issue, it could have been done a lot better, but for one issue, it does its job very nicely, and I'm excited for more. So there you go, that's issue 2. So join me next time, where according to the back of this, it's called Our Secret Wars, which will be set in the 80s, which is something I'm really looking forward to. So I hope you enjoyed. Have you read Life Story issue 2? If so, what did you think about it? Do you agree with my opinions? Do you disagree? And what did you think about the influence of the Clone Saga being in this story? I think that's something which might be a little bit controversial, because people's opinion and that story as a whole is controversial. So, I just want to know your opinions of it. So I'll see you next time for issue 3, and I hope you enjoyed this little vlog of mine. I hope you enjoyed. Ta-ra.